Hello, good morning and welcome to a special Sophy Ridge on Sunday. We're live here in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference. Well, we certainly know what Liz Truss stands for after the Chancellor's bombshell budget on Friday that, of course, included the biggest tax cuts for half a century. So the key question this morning is, what will Keir Starmer's response be? How radical is the Labour leader prepared to be on the weekend when the country is listening to find out if this is a government in waiting? Well, we'll try and find out what happens next with our guests this morning here in Liverpool. We'll be joined here at conference by the former Labour leader and now Shadow Energy and Climate Change Secretary Ed Miliband. We'll also be speaking to the Greater Manchester Mayor, possible future party leader Andy Burnham. And the Chancellor wants new legislation to clamp down on union activity with more strikes on the way. We'll be joined by the General Secretary of the UK's biggest union, Unison. That's Christina, McAnea. I'll also be joined here live by the RMT Union General Secretary Mick Lynch following his recent meeting with the new Transport Secretary about those upcoming rail strikes. Plus, we'll be talking to one of the original architects of Labour's most recent period of national election success, a grandee, shall we say, of New Labour, Lord Peter Mandelson. Hello, good morning. Well, our first guest dominated headlines across the UK 2 years ago when his battle with the government over COVID became symbolic of a disconnect between Westminster and the North. And the Mayor of Greater Manchester has campaigned for greater investment and autonomy for his region and, of course, the northern economy in general. The former Health Secretary is also sometimes touted as a potential future Labour leader. Well, he joins us now. I'm delighted to say the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham. Thank you very much for being on the programme this morning. It feels right to start with the budget this week. Pretty extraordinary, really ripping up Treasury orthodoxy and also a big departure from Boris Johnson's brand of conservatism as well. What did you make of it?
Yeah. To be honest, Sophie, I can still barely believe what we saw on Friday. We're in the midst of the worst cost of living crisis we've ever experienced. You know, people in this part of the world, in Greater Manchester, their heads are slipping beneath the water. They're living just using their microwave, not using the cooker. They've changed their life dramatically. A survey of disabled people in Greater Manchester last week said that over half have cut back what they're eating because they can't afford to eat. And then you have a budget that splurges billions on the wealthiest people in the country and actually doesn't do anything meaningful to get people through the autumn and the winter. So, honestly, I can barely believe it. It's, you know, having been through a period of national unity, the way I would describe it, Friday's budget was a flagrant act of vandalism on the social cohesion of this country. The government has drawn battle lines with working people. They've told us which side they're on. I think Labour Conference now has a chance to pick up that battle, speak for ordinary people, and in doing so, I think, put the government on borrowed time. The government on borrowed time.
OK, so you say that their dividing lines have been drawn and Labour needs to use this opportunity at conference. So, quite clearly then, do you think Labour should commit to reversing the tax cuts if Labour's in government?
Well, personally, I would have said this wasn't a time for tax cuts. This was a time to use what money was there to help people, for instance, on benefits. There should have been an uplift to universal credit, as we saw.
I just want to come in again, if I may. Because it was a really straight question. Should Labour commit to reversing the tax cuts if you're in power?
I think I answered it. I said, yes, this wasn't the time for tax cuts. I think money needs to be in the system now to help people
on benefits. That's not quite the same, if I may. If I may, that's not quite the same.
I think they should. I'm saying that they...
So, yes, they should.
Because...
Okay.
Yeah, I said that, but I said that in the answer to the first question. I was coming on to say, you know, we've got a situation where public sector pay is nowhere near inflation. So we've got a potential for a wave of industrial dispute over the winter. That money should have been used instead to help people with their pay packet so they can continue to go to work for us in the NHS or continue to serve us on the front line in the fire service without worrying about what's going on in their own home. That is what the money should have been used for, to help us through a cost of living crisis. And I think the government's made the wrong choice in this moment, and it's left millions of people at risk this winter. Lives, honestly, are on the line. We'll have a huge mental health crisis if nothing changes. And that should have been the priority. Targeted support for people to get people through this period, rather than just giving away billions of pounds, borrowing billions of pounds for bankers and billionaires. It's just obscene. It really is obscene. And I want to see Labour this week come together. Keir Starmer's put us in a position where we can win the next election. This is the first conference, Sophie, since we left government, where I think it's odds on that there could be a Labour government within 1 or 2 years. So we're in that position. And the time is now not to draw battle lines with ourselves. The government's drawn battle lines with us and with ordinary working people. Let's unite and take the fight to them in Liverpool this week.
So you're saying there could be a Labour government within 1 or 2 years. And I just want to be crystal clear, and forgive me if you obviously feel that you've answered, but I just want to be crystal clear for myself. Are you saying that Labour government, in 1 or 2 years, as you believe it will be, should reverse the 1p cut to income tax and reverse the change to the 45p rate?
Yes, I am saying that because I don't think it's the most targeted way of using the resources that we've got at this moment in time. I would use it, though, to support people in different ways. So I'm not saying we wouldn't put money in people's pockets, but if you keep that money, you are then able to target it for those who most need it. Because obviously if you cut the 20p rate, it benefits it's not as targeted a measure as doing other things, such as supporting people who are at real risk, and those are people on universal credit. You've got to sort out public sector pay. You can't leave kind of millions and millions of people in the public sector providing services we all depend upon, who themselves can't make things add up. You just can't do that. That's a recipe for chaos in our public services over the winter. So that is my position. I don't think it was a time for tax cuts. I think this is a time to support people through a crisis.
I want to talk a bit more about the kind of policies that you would also like to see. I know that you are planning on bringing the buses back under national control, public control, I should say, in Manchester. And last month you told my colleague Kay Burley that there's a case for renationalising the energy companies as well. Is that what you want to see?
Well, it follows on from what I was just saying, Sophie, because we've got to a position in this country where people can't afford life's essentials. They can't afford water, they can't afford energy, they can't afford gas to cook, as I was saying before, and they're just using a microwave. They can't afford to travel by bus, and they certainly can't afford to travel by train. And I think if you go back to the 80s, people warned about this, that if you lose control of these services, in the end, the price will go up. I don't think the service has improved, to be honest with you. I mean, certainly with rail, it's gone massively backwards. And you've got to, I would say, have more public control of the basics so that you can make them affordable to ordinary people. And it's not just words, because as you say, we've done that in Greater Manchester. I have taken the decision to put buses back under public control, and that comes in a year from now. But in advance of that, we've already brought in a fare cap so that people can afford to use the buses, and we have a system of fares that is similar to London. So that is what we are doing, and I do think it's right to be open-minded about more public control, more public ownership, so that we don't leave ourselves so exposed to energy costs as we are at this moment in time.
It's interesting, isn't it? And there's a big focus on green energy at this conference. We'll be talking to Ed Miliband about that a little bit later as well. And the new policy saying that they want to commit to net zero electricity by 2030. Given the public anxiety about bills, do you think that's the right focus? Well,
if you combine it with what I was just saying, by doing it through more it doesn't have to be national ownership, of course. You could empower bodies like mine to take a bigger stake in the development of new renewable energy. Let me say this. This is a good, bold policy from Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband this morning. This is the right way to go, face up to the future, rather than going back to the past with fracking, which, by the way, would really impact on an area like this where I'm talking to you from now, a former mining area. Fracking would disproportionately affect the north of England. It's backward looking, but it's also divisive. And that's why I say embrace the future, and Labour's doing that. And I think they need to really explain how this policy could get people's energy bills down and make us more energy secure, as I'm sure they'll do at conference this week. And that's exactly the kind of policy that I think Labour should be putting forward, as well as that immediate help for people through the cost of living crisis.
OK, we'll be talking to Ed Miliband about that in a bit more detail later. It's interesting you're using this as an example of a bold policy, and you've been talking, to be fair, about quite bold policies yourself, like more nationalisation, for example, more public ownership, and being clear on tax policy as well. We know where Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng stand. Whatever you think of what happened on Friday, it was a pretty radical budget. No one's going to be left in any doubt about what they stand for. Do you think that Labour needs to be, I guess, a bit bolder in its approach this weekend?
Well, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were radical but deeply wrong. And I would go so far to say immoral. I don't see how you can possibly justify a package like that when, as I said before, the heads of millions of people are slipping beneath the water. I just don't understand how you can possibly put that forward. It's brazen. It's the drawing of battle lines, as I say, with ordinary people. So this is the time for Labour to move up and set out an alternative that people can support. And so I want to be clear. You know, I'm supporting Keir. I want the party to unite here in Liverpool. They've got us in a position where we've got a clear and sustained poll lead, which is no small achievement. It's a big achievement. And I think the government has now opened up a huge opportunity for Labour to put out a programme that connects with ordinary people. So yes, I would say be bolder, be clear about what we will do. I'm a little disappointed to hear the party saying that it's going to rule out electoral reform. I think I would say to them, listen to hear the mood of conference on that particular issue. I hope conference will still vote in favour of that, because we've got to maximise the chance here of a Labour-led government. But I would also just say, for people who doubt the case for electoral reform, over the summer we have just seen the most graphic demonstration we've ever seen of how a small number of people, a small elite, can manipulate the political system in their interests. And that's what we saw on Friday. This was a budget for bankers. This was a budget for Tory donors. That is what has happened in this country. And this is what Labour now can say to the public. Look, we're going to change things. We're going to reform the way votes work. We're going to reform the way politics works. And we're going to make it work for you. And these are our policies that we're going to do right now to help you through this biggest cost of living crisis we've ever faced.
You've clearly got ideas that you want to see Labour moving towards. Are you tempted to come back to Westminster and put them into action? I mean, I couldn't help but notice there's a by-election coming up in West Lancashire after Rosie Cooper announced she's stepping down. Are you tempted to throw your hat in the ring?
Well, I said I would do a full second term in Greater Manchester, and I'm in the middle of that. And to be honest with you, it's so energising what we're doing. You know, we're making change happen here. You know, that decision to put buses under public control, that is where my head is right now. We are in the middle of a massive reform of public transport.
What about in 2024 when your term comes to an end?
Well, my term is still going in 2024, so you know, as I say, that's where my focus is. I'll be honest with you, Sophie. I've said I've not ruled out coming back one day, but I've made commitments to the people of Greater Manchester. I'm going to see those commitments through.
OK. I was interested to read that you said you felt imposter syndrome during your time at Westminster before. I just wonder if you could, you know, I'm sure that's something that lots of us, including myself, can really relate to. Has that changed? Do you think you'd make a good Prime Minister now?
I think people are kind of seeing the real me more. You do get that sense of feeling, you know, do I really belong here when you're in that Westminster system because of the way it is. I can't be the first person to have felt some of that. But also, I think the way it works isn't helpful for connecting politics to people, because it makes you vote in a way that you might not necessarily fully believe in because of the whip system, or you have to say things to take the line that the party wants you to take. And I think you kind of get to a point where the public will think, well, who is this person? Because, you know, does he really believe all of these things? And I think Westminster does that. The risk is it makes a fraud out of people because you're always kind of doing things you half believe in or you don't fully want to say. And I feel much more liberated and clear out of Westminster about what I'm about, what I'm trying to do for the people of Greater Manchester, but the bigger reforms I think the country makes. And I've stopped sort of, you know, kind of speaking in code, if you like. You know, I thought you thought I was speaking in code at the start of this interview, but I wasn't. You know, I say now what I think is needed. I hope that's a helpful, independent voice, if you like. You know, without all of the kind of the strictures of Westminster holding me back. I just think it's beneficial for politics to have people like me in these mayoral positions. We can speak for people from the real world, as you said at the start of the interview, and I think that's a helpful blast of reality into Westminster at times, which doesn't always operate in that way.
I'm being told that I need to run out of time, but I just want to squeeze in one more very quick one, if I may, Mr. Burnham. You were talking there about the kind of experience you've had as mayor. Do you think you might make a better crack at the leadership now than you did last time when you obviously failed to win?
Well, I didn't just lose once, Sophie, as you remember. I lost twice, so I didn't make a very good crack at all, did I? So, you know, as I say, I've kind of taken a step outside. I think it's been to my benefit. I wouldn't rule out one day going back, as I've said. I'm just going to be honest about that. And I probably am a better politician, I think, anyway, these days, because, as I say, I'm not kind of caveating everything. I'm not sort of second-guessing everything. I'm just calling things as I see them. And just, if I could say finally, when it comes to the government, you know, I don't play... They think I always play party politics. I don't. If the government gets something right, I will say so, such as the help they're giving us to reform buses. That's right, thank you, that's the right thing to do. Okay. But when they get things wrong, I will call things out as strongly as I can. And what they've just done, as I say again, it's obscene, it's immoral. Throwing billions at the richest people in this country at this moment in time, it's a recipe for, I think, serious issues over this winter. And that's why the Labour movement now needs to unite and fight it. OK. Understood. Thank you very much. Andy Burnham there talking to us from the Labour conference. Well, that is the Mayor of Manchester's view. Let's find out what the Shadow Cabinet view, shall we? Because Ed Miliband, who is the Shadow Energy and Climate Change Secretary, is here this morning. They've unveiled a new green policy, haven't you? That I'm sure you'll be very keen to talk us about in a moment. I just want to get your reaction to Andy Burnham there. Would you be pleased to see him back in Westminster?
Definitely. You know, Andy's doing a brilliant job as Mayor of Greater Manchester. And I think what you see right across the country is Labour local authority leaders, Labour mayors, if you like, showing what can be done if you're in power. But look, Andy is a great talent for our party, and he can serve us in multiple ways. OK, right, let's talk about your policy. You're announcing today a Labour government would deliver net zero for electricity by 2030. Talk to us about that. A zero-carbon power system. This is a world-leading commitment that we are making. And why are we doing it, Sophie? It will make a difference in a number of ways. First of all, it will cut people's energy bills. Because let's be clear about this, the only way to get out of this fossil fuels crisis, the only way to cut bills is green energy. Green energy is currently 9 times cheaper than gas. That's renewables like wind and solar. They're 9 times cheaper than gas. So it will save £93 billion off bills over the coming years. It will give us energy security. We won't be relying on Putin's gas, for example. Homegrown, renewable and nuclear power. Thirdly, it will create jobs, 500,000 jobs for our country, and it puts us in the forefront of the fight against the climate crisis. So it's the kind of radical action we need, and crucially, and this is a contrast with last Friday, it is about building an economy that works for the many, right across our country, not about building an economy which is for a few at the top of our society. You say it's radical. Yeah. At the same time, the government has also committed to net zero electricity by 2035. It's just 5 years earlier, right? Well, it's just 5 years. I mean, 5 years is a long time. We're in a decisive moment. And look, people... OK, so how much will it cost to do it 5 years earlier, then? Well, here's the thing. The vast majority of this will come not from the taxpayer, but will come from private investment. You see, private investors are lining up to go for wind energy and solar energy, but they can't because government blocks them on onshore wind, blocks them on solar and doesn't make the investments we need.
What will the cost be? Just explain.
So we've made a pledge of a £28 billion each and every year, a Green Prosperity Plan pledge. We think this will cost around £2 billion a year to make this happen. So a small proportion of that pledge, and it is the right thing to do for the country. And crucially, you know, if I'd been on your programme 10 years ago, your programme wasn't on 10 years ago, but if I'd been on 10 years ago, I would have said, look, green is the ethical choice, and it's the right thing to do for the long term. It's the ethical choice and the economic choice now. Now, it's such a contrast with the government because they say, well, the answer is fracking and all these things which will not make any difference to bills and aren't safe.
You talk about affordability, and obviously everyone, I think, or the vast majority of people would accept that green energy and renewables is a key part to affordability. Yeah. But at the same time, if your focus was just on affordability, you'd be looking at everything, wouldn't you? You'd be looking at green renewables, yes, you would, but you'd also be looking at North Sea oil and gas. You'd also be looking at fracking too, because don't you just need to look at the
No, you wouldn't. It's really important to explain this to people. Look, gas is sold on a global market. The price we pay for North Sea gas or fracked gas, if that ever happens, is exactly the same as we pay for imported gas. Don't take my word for it. Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor, said it will make no difference to price. It's an illusion
to think... But we're
looking
at supply overall, aren't we?
Yes.
Global supply. And so that is... whoever is producing oil and gas, who isn't Putin, that is going to benefit, isn't it?
No. I mean, look, we've got to use the North Sea. We're going to carry on using the North Sea. But if what you're asking me is fracking or some dash for gas in the North Sea going to be the answer, it is not going to be the answer, because it won't bring down prices. And this is the key thing. And on fracking, I've got to say, Sophie, I mean, you know, it's obviously been slightly lost because of the appalling budget we had on Friday from Kwasi Kwarteng, but the idea that the government that promised in the 2019 general election not to restart fracking unless it was safe, now is going to do so. And what is their excuse? Well, they say not that they found out it's safe, but that a bit more risk is a price worth paying for people across our country. It just says it all about this government. They stand up for the fossil fuel companies. They don't stand up for the British people.
So you say that you want to spend £28 billion a year on the kind of green energy deal. At a time when borrowing is at the levels that it is, partly, of course, because of government policy, but let's be frank, mainly because of what we've seen with inflation, energy bills and so on as well. We know that you would also like to freeze bills. Is spending £28 billion a year a sensible thing to do?
Absolutely it is. And I'll tell you why it is. And you see it with the policy I'm announcing today. The whole reason we're making this investment is we get a return. And what you're going to be hearing from Labour this week is not just today's plan on 2030 zero carbon power, our world-leading plan, but you're going to be hearing a series of policies from me, from Rachel Reeves, from Keir Starmer, about how making those investments will create the jobs across our country that we need, get us ahead in the global race. You see, the difference between us and the government is not whether we need growth. Yes, they've had an appalling growth record. I'm glad they're finally admitting it. The question is, how do you create that growth? They say tax cuts for some people at the top, for millionaires and bankers, is going to create the growth. The wealth will trickle down to everybody else. Well, we know that's been tried in the past and totally failed. We say something different. You build the economy from the ground up by making these investments. And today is phase one, the first building block.
At the same time, though, look, the evidence on tax cuts is mixed and growth is mixed, right?
It's not mixed.
Well, if you look at, you know, Reagan, for example, they would point to in the States.
No.
But
let me tell you,
I've got to take you. I
want to pick you up on this. Hang on a second. The International Monetary Fund, right? Hardly a kind of group of kind of loony lefties. The International Monetary Fund says that actually, if you look, increasing the incomes of the top part of our society does not lead to higher growth, quite the opposite.
OK, so would a Labour government reverse the 45p cut?
Well, look, we've said we're against it. We said it's the wrong thing to do. Let me just tell you why it's the wrong thing to do.
Yes or no,
giving a £50,000 tax cut to millionaires in our country is not the right answer.
So
now, tax policy... Just let me answer the question. I think you'll be pleased. Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves set out tax policy, and Keir will be saying more about this quite shortly. But let me be clear. We're going to be consistent in our election manifesto with our opposition to the 45p tax cut, because we think it's the wrong thing to do for the country.
Understood. How about the 19p cut, the cut from 20p to 19?
No, we don't think that should be reversed, because, you know, remember that when we're talking about this basic rate cut, I mean, people start paying that at £12,500.
So you disagree with Andy Burnham, then?
Well, I don't think we should reverse that tax cut. Look, the point is the government has raised taxes on ordinary families by massive amounts. The Institute of Fiscal Study says that even with that tax cut from 20 to 19, ordinary families will still be paying more in tax. In fact, everyone up to £155,000 will be paying more tax than at the start of the Parliament, so we won't be reversing that, no.
OK, understood. Now, if you ask Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng to sum up in a word what their government was all about...
A word, yes.
We know, well, I can imagine what your word might be, but their word would be growth, right? What would be your word to sum up what this Labour government...
Well, look,
or Labour
I won't give you one word, but look, it says on our conference backdrop, a fairer, greener future, and that is what we're about. You know, fairness, because we don't think that as you look at the problems our country faces, that the answer is lifting the bank bonus cap or tax cuts for millionaires, cost of living crisis, the NHS. So fairer, greener, and the two go together, and they produce not only fairness, but prosperity for our country.
Do you think that there is a... I guess some would say that Labour hasn't been bold enough going forward on setting out what you would do if you were in government. On strikes, for example, are you for or against strikes?
Well, look, I think
do you think that there is a need for Labour to be a little bit more radical?
Well, look, I think, you know, I was sort of leader of the opposition, so I've got some experience, I've got some previous on this. You know, there's a kind of cycle to these things that, you know, at the beginning of the Parliament, you tend to be less specific, more thematic. I think what you're seeing from Labour this week and what you're going to see in the coming days, and the first thing today, you know, this is a bold plan we're announcing. I mean, you know, no other major country in the world has said what we are saying today, that by 2030 we'll have a zero-carbon power system. I mean, that is a big deal, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of that in the days to come.
We'll be seeing a lot more of Keir Starmer as well, someone that has been described as boring, according to some anonymous briefings. Can you...
I'm sure I was described as that too, probably not anonymously either.
Can you tell us something surprising about Keir Starmer?
Something surprising? You know, actually, I think what you see with Keir Starmer is what you get. And actually, I think the British people want that.
And what is that, then?
Frankly, dependability, decency, integrity, somebody who's going to do the right thing for the country. And, you know, we had the years of Boris Johnson. We had somebody who, you know, broke the rules, broke the law, did all those things.
You're not up against Boris Johnson anymore, though?
No, we're not. But I think people want someone of decency, integrity, who knows where he came from and knows what he's in politics for. Look, he looks at this country and sees deep injustice, and he says, we're going to change this economy, we're going to change this country, and you're going to be hearing a lot more of that from him this week.
You mentioned that you've been Labour leader before.
Yeah.
I remember it very well on the
You
battle
do,
bus
you
with
do,
you.
you do. I was very pleased to have you on the bus.
I'm sure, well, most of the time anyway, I'm sure.
Yeah, all the time, all the time.
Now, have you given Keir Starmer any advice on how to cope with, I guess, some of the pressures of being leader?
I mean, I sort of think he doesn't need my advice. I mean, the only thing I'd say is, and it goes to the question you just asked me, which is, don't pretend to be something you're not. And that's what's been very good about Keir's leadership.
Do you think you did that a bit?
No. I mean, I think probably I mean, sort of, you know, this is sort of ancient history, but, you know, in a way, I've said I wish I'd been bolder as Labour leader. Maybe I felt too much of the weight of the office, you know, felt too constrained. But I think, you know, I think big ideas are our friend in politics. I think people in the country, and remember, it's about people in the country, they, you know, I lost the election in 2015. Since then, we've had the Brexit referendum. We've had all kinds of things that have happened in our country. I think all of them show one thing, though. So many people say the economy, the country doesn't work for me. What are you going to do to make life better for me? What are you going to do to change things for me? And I think that's where Labour's focus needs to be.
Do you think he's got a better chance of winning an election than you did?
Yes. Yes, definitely. And look, I think the thing about Keir is that people can see him as a credible Prime Minister. And I think they're going to be seeing this week the ideas, the things he cares about that he wants to do if he was to win that election.
OK, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you. Ed Miliband there. Now, on Friday, of course, the Chancellor announced new legislation to require unions to put pay offers to staff before calling strikes. Well, Kwasi Kwarteng also wants so-called minimum service levels to stop strikes, shutting down transport networks as well. Now, unions, as you might expect, condemn the move as more strikes are announced on the rail network, with a threat of action across the economy and public services as well. Now, the UK's biggest union is Unison, with 1.3 million members that work in public services. And I'm delighted to say the General Secretary, Christina McAnea, is with us now. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Well, it wasn't a mini budget on Friday, was it? It was a mega budget, the biggest tax cuts for half a century. What impact do you think that might have on public services?
Well, as ever, they'll be the ones that are expected to pay for this. I mean, the irony is, during austerity years, when we had Cameron and George Osborne selling us, everyone was in it together, and you know, we had to cut back, and public sector workers had to take a pay freeze, and now it's spend, spend, spend. And again, I'm pretty certain it will be public sector workers and public services that will actually end up paying for this, because they've already announced they want big reforms. They want to, they're telling us to exercise pay restraint, and it seems under this government, public services are just not a priority at all.
Now, Unison is balloting its NHS workers over strike action. So we could see, you know, nurses going on strike, midwives going on strike. You know, a lot of our viewers might be a bit worried about what that means, right? You know, because you can't choose the timing of when to have a stroke, you can't choose when to have a baby, right?
Yeah.
You can't delay it till after strike action. Isn't patient safety going to be put at risk here?
Well, patient safety is always paramount. We have had strikes before. We had a strike in 2014 in England and Wales, and we will always put in minimum safe staffing levels. The interesting thing is, when Liz Truss said she was going to bring in minimum staffing levels, we've been calling for that for years in the NHS because we don't have it. And what our members, the members are telling me, you know, so our paramedics, our nurses, our cleaners in hospitals are saying things like, the service is so badly run down, it's on its knees, there's not enough staff, and actually taking strike action they don't think will make it any worse. But what it might help do is, one, get them more money when they're totally struggling, but two, actually draw attention to the fact that the government has no proper plan or strategy for dealing with some of our major and essential public services.
I guess what I don't understand is, if staffing is so stretched in the NHS and under so much pressure, then surely strike action is going to make things worse. How can it not?
Well, strike action has to be effective, and by that it must have an impact in any sector. But certainly where it's about people's life and safety, there will always be a life and limb policy. We will always agree with local employers certain levels of cover, but it does mean other things won't get done. It will have an impact, without a doubt.
What kind of impact could it have?
Well, sometimes they might have to cancel operations. Certain clinics won't open. But essential life-saving things, you know, in A&E departments, or as you say, in maternity departments, will still continue, because everybody knows you can't choose when you're going to have a baby. So you won't get midwives walking off a ward when there's women in labour. That just won't happen.
But we could have more delayed operations, cancelled operations.
Yes.
Yes, that could happen. Understood. So you are launching legal action, I think I'm right in saying, against the government to try and stop the use of agency workers to cover striking nurses.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, we
so
are.
Just explain.
So the government's brought in started legislation to allow employers to bring in agency workers when basically as strike breakers. So we have legislation currently in this country, and indeed most of Europe, which says you can't do that. And the government, in its wisdom, or the lack of, has decided they're going to change that. Now, not only are we concerned about it, the organisations that represent agency workers are concerned about it.
But isn't that about ensuring patient safety, though?
Well,
to
where
make
are they
sure
going to
that
find
you
these
do
nurses?
have enough people to look after people in hospitals if it's necessary?
There's 140,000 vacancies in the NHS at the moment. There aren't the agency workers out there to come and do it. And if there are people who have chosen to, you know, give their services through an agency, it's because they get paid so much more than they would if they were employed by the NHS. And that's a problem for the country as a whole. And I mean, this thing about removing the cap and bankers' bonuses because they're losing good people, where is the evidence for that? Or is this just dinner party talk where their friends say, oh, it's dreadful, I'm going to have to go to Hong Kong to get more money? I can actually provide hard evidence of 140,000 vacancies in the NHS, 160,000 vacancies in the care service. Why don't the government do something about that?
We're seeing strikes being called or balloted on, you know, across so many industries, with inflation high and people feeling their wages aren't keeping up. Do you think we're getting close to a general strike?
Well, we're certainly getting close to a well-coordinated strike across different sectors. Now, in the past, we've
Is that
always...
a general strike?
No, there's a legal definition of a general strike, as far as I'm aware, which is it's predominantly a political act, and there's very strong, tough legislation in this country that makes that virtually impossible. So it's not impossible, but it's not... You know, we probably wouldn't call it a general strike, but what you would call it is a strike across a whole range of sectors at the same time, which is not the same as a general strike.
I mean, it sounds... A lot of people might say, look, if it's a coordinated strike across different sectors and unions, it is kind of a general strike.
Well, if I was to say we're calling a general strike, my union's funds would be sequestered. Any of the members who took part in it, what's called a political strike, would lose any protection from dismissal. They would just be sacked.
So if you don't call it a general strike, then...
Well, it's not about not calling it. What we're doing is going through legal process to bring our members out safely and legally and give them the protection. We have the toughest industrial relations legislation in this country. You have to jump through about 10, 12 hoops just to be able to bring people out on legal strikes. And that's why this sort of demonising of workers who are already on strike is so unfair, because they're taking part in legal disputes and legal strikes. They're not taking part in unlawful strikes.
Would you like to see a tougher line from Labour on this?
You know, to be quite honest, I don't think it makes a difference whether Labour are on picket lines or not. Labour is there to, I think, hopefully work with us. And I think if there was a Labour government in place, I would hope that we wouldn't be just about to ballot 400,000 NHS workers by the end of this year. I would hope they would talk to us. I wrote to Liz Truss the day she got elected and congratulated her and said we'd be happy to work with her. But they obviously see unions as part of the problem, and actually strikes are a symptom of problems. They're not the cause of the problems. And we're willing to work with her. I'm pretty certain Frances O'Grady from the General Secretary of the TUC would be willing to work with her. But we're getting nothing back from this government other than...
Are you getting much back from Labour?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And we work with them on, you know, new policies that are coming forward. We don't get everything we want because, you know, they want to govern the country for everyone, not just for trade unions. And therefore we won't get everything that we want. But we can certainly try and influence them and work with them to get changes in that actually benefit working people.
Thanks very much for being on the programme today. Good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Now, our next guest, Peter Mandelson, was alongside Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, one of the architects of New Labour, which was, of course, one of the most electorally successful eras of, well, any party, but his party in particular. He famously once said he was intensely relaxed about people getting filthy rich, although he did sort of walk it back slightly years later. Well, I'm very looking forward to speaking to him to try and find out about how he thinks Labour should react to Friday's tax cuts, and does he think Keir Starmer is ready to be Prime Minister? Good to have you on the programme this morning, Mr Mandelson.
Nice
it feels slightly churlish to be...
Sophie, I'm afraid you didn't complete my quote. I talked about it's fine for people to become rich as long as they pay their taxes, a rather important qualification which you left out.
Absolutely, I completely take your point on that. Are you relaxed about the banker's bonus cap then, just quickly before we start the rest of the interview?
I don't really have strong views on the banker's bonus cap either way, frankly. I don't think it's a priority for us in getting the economy growing again. I mean, what I feel about the Chancellor's package on Friday is that it will take some time to see how reckless a gamble it may well turn out to be through higher inflation, higher borrowing costs for companies, higher interest rates for mortgage holders. So let's see how this pans out. But I do believe that what Labour's got to do is not concentrate on all the noise surrounding what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are doing. They've got to concentrate on their own agenda, setting out their own plan for growth. And I'm very pleased that they've started to do that at the conference in Liverpool today.
Yeah, it's interesting you're talking about Labour's plan for growth, because in June you made a speech saying that Labour should focus on raising the UK's long-term growth rate. It feels, since you made that speech, that Liz Truss has done everything she can to try and occupy that space. Do you think, I guess, Labour's been a bit slow out the blocks on this?
I don't think Liz Truss is doing that. I think she is certainly taking the country off in a radical direction, but I don't think it's the right direction, because at the same time as these measures that we heard about on Friday, the government is also closing down all the machinery relating to the development and exploitation of Britain's brilliant science and technology base in this country. You know, she's closed down the Cabinet Committee, the national machinery for bringing government and business together to exploit the new technologies. She's closed down the Office of Science and Technology Strategy in the Cabinet Office. This is the wrong thing to do. What we've got to do, as Ed Miliband was saying before, is invest very heavily and primarily through private sector investment in the technology-based new industries and markets and employment that are emerging now in our economy. And that private investment depends on economic stability, regulatory certainty, cheap borrowing costs, but also a very strong partnership between government and business. And I'm glad that the Shadow Business Secretary, Johnny Reynolds, is publishing a document tomorrow precisely on that subject, how government can work hand in hand with the private sector to bring about that much needed investment in the whole spate of technology-based new industries that are emerging, at the heart of which is the green energy transition.
You're talking about the green energy transition. You've said that Labour's commitment to spending £28 billion for 10 years on climate change. You were talking about in this speech saying just announcing a massive spend and a big policy goal does not in itself deliver economic growth. Do you still have those concerns, or do you think you're getting a bit more meat on the bone now?
Oh, we're getting much more meat on the bone. I mean, look. The whole point is this, Sophie, if I can just make it very simply and clearly. Government and business, public investment and private investment together, needs to invest in these new technology-based industries and markets that are emerging, not just from the green transition, but the whole diffusion of digital technology and the emerging critical technologies like artificial intelligence and the use of data across the economy and society. But here's the point. We've got to translate those great transitions that are taking place into the creation of UK industry, UK-based supply chains and UK-based employment, rather than seeing that massive expenditure leaking out of our economy and going off to benefit our neighbouring economies. And I'm very pleased that the plans that are going to be set out this week, both by Rachel Reeves, Ed Miliband and Johnny Reynolds, are going to set out that industrial policy which needs to support this very large-scale public and private investment.
Now, you, of course, are parts of the most successful Labour team ever in terms of election success, the famous, of course, 1997 landslide under Tony Blair. And you've been pretty critical of where Labour's been since. You said that Labour needs a complete break from the last 10 years of failure under Ed Miliband and Jeremy Corbyn, also describing Ed Miliband, this was in 2021, as a flop and a complete failure. Has that complete break happened?
I don't remember describing Ed Miliband in that way, but I'm sure your researchers will be able to furnish you with the facts. Look, here's the point about Friday, and it offers both an opportunity and a challenge for Labour. The opportunity is that in tearing off in the direction they've chosen, the Conservatives are forfeiting their reputation for sound money and fiscal discipline. That's been a very hard-won electoral weapon that they've created and deployed since Mrs. Thatcher's time. And they've thrown that away in the measures they announced on Friday. But here's the challenge for Labour. In responding to what Liz Truss is doing, is taking the Conservative Party it back into its own sort of ideological right-wing comfort zone, as we saw them doing on Friday, Labour's response should not be to retreat into its own comfort zone of tax and spend and big state and the policies that we associate with Jeremy Corbyn. You know, the public have got to know, and they've got to be reminded every day from here to polling day, that Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters and all they stood for are behind us, and that it's now completely safe to vote for Labour again, that we've got sensible, middle ground, practical, affordable policies which are going to bring about that economic transformation and that structural change in our economy that we need in order to sustain economic growth in the long term.
Do you think Labour would now win the next election?
I do actually believe that what we are seeing emerging in the country is a sort of shift in public opinion. I think we are seeing a potential sea change in attitudes in the public about what the public wants and what the public won't put up with. But here's the point. Liz Truss, in effect, and the Conservatives, in their effect, are taking their own policy direction off the centre ground, the middle ground of British politics. Now, that creates an opportunity for Labour to occupy that centre ground. That's where the swathe of voters exist in the country who are going to determine the outcome of the next election. And they are focused both on economic competence and fairness and social justice. Those are two sides of the coin, the policy coin, the political coin, that the broad mass of voters right across the centre ground of British politics are focused on. That's what they want to vote for, and that's what Labour needs to offer.
Thank you. We are out of time, but just quickly, do you speak much to Keir Starmer, offer him any advice?
I do speak to him from time to time, yes, and members of his team. But I don't do for him and for them what I did for Tony Blair and Gordon Brown and before them Neil Kinnock. But whenever they want any help, you know, my phone's there for them to call. But, you know, they've chosen their course. They want to do their own thing. I perfectly well understand that. And actually, I strongly support the course they're taking. And I support Keir Starmer because I think he's a hard-working, public-spirited, patriotic leader for this country, the Prime Minister that I think overwhelmingly now the public are moving towards and deciding that they want to see in number 10.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Lord
Pleasure.
Mandelson there. Thank you. Now, the RMT union is leading a wave of strikes across the railway network, the biggest for decades. But the General Secretary, Mick Lynch, met with the new Transport Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan, recently and said it was a good start and a pleasant meeting. So is a thaw in the air? Could a deal be on the cards? Let's try and find out. Is a deal on the cards or is strike action inevitable?
Well, there's no deal on the table, and the strike action we've got down over the next 2 weeks will go ahead as far as we know. What we need to see from the new Secretary of State is the ability to unblock the problems in the dispute. Her predecessor seemed to be putting obstacles in the way of everyone, including the employers, by shackling them to a mandate that was impossible to deliver. They were putting down issues that we could never accept and the other trade unions could never accept. So I've asked the new Secretary of State, and it was a good meeting and a positive attitude, a bit of goodwill, to try and unthaw this situation. We need to get the thing out of deep freeze and get it on the table so we can work through the problem. So I've asked her to be a facilitator for that, and I hope she can do it. But I'll have to see whether there's any proof in that pudding over the next few weeks.
But you are a bit optimistic then. It does seem like you've got quite a different view so far
Well,
of the two.
It's better to be invited to a meeting than be harangued all over the media, which is what we were getting. I was going into certain studios saying, look, let's try and get a deal. If you want to talk to us, you can. And he was just slagging us off, threatening us with more and more anti-trade union laws, calling me a dinosaur and a baron and all this kind of nonsense. And if somebody wants to meet you and shakes your hand, that's a positive start. It's the better way to conduct business than just slagging each other off, and that's not what I'm into, and I hope that she's not either.
At the same time, we have seen tightening of strike laws, haven't we, on Friday? What do you make of that?
Well, they're not just strike laws, they're an attack on civil liberties and human rights. So they're trying to make it impossible for trade unions to exist in this country, and they're trying to make it impossible, in fact, for the people of this country to campaign against poverty, which is what many of them are changing. If there is no trade union freedom and it's impossible to conduct lawful industrial action, people will have to go another way. They'll have to think of other means of doing it. They're trying to regulate unions, and they've said they're going to cut red tape. The only people that are going to be subject to stringent regulation are the trade unions, and they want to regulate the relationship between the union and its members. That's not acceptable. People will always regret further oppression of trade union rights because we won't be able to protest. We've got a new police bill that's going to stop us protesting on the streets, and we're going to have a set of trade union laws that attempt to stop us having a balanced equation in the workplace, and that's not acceptable.
You say that if it, in your words, becomes impossible to strike, people will find other means. What do you mean?
Well, if people can't take lawful industrial action, they'll have to take unlawful industrial action, and we're fast getting to a situation where we're going to have laws that are as oppressive as those that exist in Russia and China, and back in Poland before Solidarność came along and took unlawful industrial action in that environment to break free of the oppression of the old Soviet bloc and the communist regime over there.
What specifically, just to come in, because obviously it's quite a big statement to say that, look, the laws are as oppressive as those in Russia and around the world. What laws are you talking about specifically?
They're going to make it impossible for us to have lawful ballots. They're going to make it impossible for us...
Just explain what...
Well, because they're going to raise the thresholds to a level where it will be very difficult to conduct...
50%, is that right?
50% turnouts and 50% of the whole population in the ballot to get a yes vote. If we brought those into local councils, for instance, or indeed in Parliament, most of the people that currently serve on local councils wouldn't be councillors. If we brought those into Parliament, most of the people in Parliament do not receive 50% of the vote in parliamentary elections. They won't allow us to do electronic voting. It all has to be done via the Royal Mail, by postal voting, but they won't allow us to use any modern techniques. They want to fine us for any mistakes we make during ballots that could finish trade unions. And they want us to give 4 weeks' notice, which will make effective industrial action very difficult to carry out. And they want us to do this continual round of referenda based on every single offer or every discussion that we have with an employer, which will have us running around like spinning tops. If an employer offers me 1.95 1 week and the next week offers me 1.96, quasi quating saying that I have to do a referendum every time that somebody scratches their nose. It's a ridiculous situation, and it's going to make it impossible for us to operate.
We spoke to the Unison General Secretary a bit earlier on the programme, and she was saying that, look, you know, a technical general strike is unlikely to happen, but yes, there is coordinated action. For many people, that is basically a general strike.
Well, unions need to make their power effective, and at the end of the day, if negotiations fail, we've got intransigent employers, and many employers in this country are making super profits. The rich are getting richer than they've ever been.
So unions are organising together, that would be fair?
Well, we talk to each other. It would be silly for unions not to coordinate their forces, and so we're taking action alongside the postal workers next week, alongside the ASLEF union, and if other people want to join in a wave of response and resistance to what's going on, where the rich are being made richer all of the time, and we've seen that in the budget on Friday, where everybody who's under 155,000 in salary will be poorer, and everybody above that salary will be richer. Well, we've got to be able to rebalance our society and our economy.
So it does sound like we'll be seeing coordinated action, strike action this autumn.
If we cannot get settlements, we'll have to coordinate our action.
And what do you make of Labour's response?
Well, I want to see Labour win. I want Labour to win the next election. I want Keir Starmer to be our next Prime Minister. That's what I want. But I think in order to do that, he's got to show that he empathises and sympathises with what working people are going through. They're really struggling. People are scared that they're going to lose their homes, never mind heat them. People are going to face landlords that are pushing up rents and banks that are pushing up mortgage rates. That's on top of the utility bills crisis and the price of living. He's got to show that he identifies with what we're going through.
Has he shown that yet?
I haven't seen it. If I could see it, I'd be delighted. So I'm hoping this week that we can all come away saying, look, Keir Starmer's on our side. We can put our shoulder to his wheel to get him elected, and he's putting his shoulder to working people's wheel to help them in their everyday problems. But I want to see a set of values. I don't mind about detailed policy, that's to come. But I want him to show that he's got the values that identify with the men and women in this country that are really struggling are frightened of what's in front of them.
So do you think he should be on a picket line then?
I'm not worried about whether he's on a picket line or not. I don't expect him to be there, but I want him to identify with our causes and the issues that we face.
And how does he do that then?
I think he sets out a programme, some charters, some values that say we've got a housing crisis in this country, we've got an energy price problem in this country, we've got a wages problem. And he needs to say that I'm on your side, and when we get into power, we're going to bring in a set of measures, regulations and laws that rebalance the way that working people are treated in this country and gives them a voice in the workplace and in society.
Do you ever speak to him, Keir Starmer?
I spoke to him over the P&O crisis and he was really good. He was really on our side. I don't expect him to do what I tell him to do. I don't think, well, the world works like that. I come up to the Labour conference to try and influence, to talk to friends, talk to people that don't like me, and there are plenty of them as well. So, we're here to influence and try to help in some ways. I'm hoping that he can show that he's sympathetic to what we're going through. Railway workers are really struggling, and millions of other workers are really struggling. We've got the postal workers, we've got the dockers on strike right now in Liverpool. He can show that he's on their side and sympathises with what they do. That doesn't mean he has to wade directly into each and every dispute, but he's got to show he's on the side of the workers, because after all, this is a Labour Party. The name's on the tin, and he's got to show that he's a friend of every worker in this country.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme today, Mick Lynch, there of the RMT. Now, it can often feel like there's a bit of disconnect between Westminster and what's actually going on in people's lives around the country. So each week on the programme, we're trying to speak to people from across the United Kingdom and really talk about the challenges that they're facing, be it on the cost of living, an energy crisis, or the NHS, perhaps housing, crime, and more as well too. Now, here in Liverpool, we are trying to look a bit at the NHS. We were speaking about it earlier in the programme, but just 10 days ago, bosses at the Royal Liverpool Hospital issued a full capacity warning staff in a letter that there was no space in resuscitation areas. And we can speak now to NHS staff nurse Mark Anthony and hear his story. Thank you very much for being with us. It's good to have you on the programme today. I mean, look, we see the statistics on the NHS, waiting times, ambulance delays, postponed appointments. But I guess I'm interested to hear the human side. What is it like to work in the NHS at the minute?
It's absolutely terrible for staff working in the NHS at the moment. We're chronically understaffed. Staff cannot even give the basic care for patients. Sometimes you get staff getting in trouble because they've not been able to give medication on time, or to end up getting some performance plans or disciplines, and it's not their fault at all. This is the fault of the government. The government has let the nursing down terribly over the past 10 years. We're vastly underpaid, and the staffing is absolutely so bad now that I fear for patient safety. I really do, and I think we unless we have no choice now as the Royal College of Nursing to ballot for strike action. We're not doing this for our own selfish aims or anything like that. We're grossly underpaid. Nurses are leaving in their droves. 20,000 left this year, and now we end up in a situation where patients are so much at risk now that we have to do things like this. This government is not listening, and it never was going to listen. And but we've tried very, very hard to negotiate, and we're not getting anywhere.
I wanted to hear a bit about what it's like on the actual wards. You were talking there about the pressure that nurses are under, patient safety being put at risk. What kind of things do you mean? Is it like people have been given the wrong medication because there's a rush, or what is it like?
What it is that the wards are so understaffed that you can actually get situations where sometimes patients at times maybe not given the medication in time. Sometimes there are situations where the patients are put at risk because they could have health and safety issues like falls and things like that on the wards. There's also situations where just the basic care, sometimes you get some patients, unfortunately, which is tragic to say this, that sometimes can be sat in faeces and nurses can't get to them in times where they'd already try to, and in just the basic care of even just trying to give them food and things like that. It's getting so bad now that we're in I've never known it as bad as this because I've been nursing 35 years, and now I know it's now from the stories that I hear from my colleagues and things like that. This is just a dire situation, and it's only going to get worse.
And you've been a nurse for 35 years, so you're still a nurse. You're also a member of the Royal College of Nursing Union. Is this the worst that you've ever seen it?
It is definitely the worst I've ever seen it. And the real tragedy that what's happening now, this is actually becoming the norm. If this carries on, with what's happening, the NHS is just going to lose its value as to what it used to be. I mean, I'm proud to be a nurse. I'm proud to. I joined it as a vocation. I joined it to represent, to want to care for people. And now it's not coming that way. You just come on the shifts. You're totally stressed out. You're up to, and you know that it's going to be a really hard shift. They're moving staff from one ward to the other, from one hospital to the other. It's like shuffling the pack because of the situation. The staffing levels towards the number of patients, it can be drastic. Sometimes you get 2 staff and you get 20 odd to 30 patients on a ward, and that is just not good enough. It's absolutely dangerous. And something has to be done. And if they don't pay nurses the proper pay that they should be getting, and remember, we've been taking a pay cut over the past 10 years, and we're constantly trying to battle for this, because if you don't pay nurses the proper pay, the nurses are going to continue to leave the service, not wanting to do that. They have no choice. We didn't join nursing to be dirt poor. We joined nursing to want to take care of patients, to want to be responsible for doing that, and we love our job. But now we're pushed so much now that we have no choice now but to come out fighting.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting, as always, to hear the stories from people on the front line. I'm going to keep trying to do it on the programme. Mark Anthony there, staff nurse and member of the Royal College of Nursing. Well, that is it for this week's Sophy Ridge on Sunday here at Liverpool conference. In a moment after the break, by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, plus 2 Labour MPs will be here as well to talk about where they hope their party goes over the next couple of years. Thanks for joining us this Sunday morning. Hello, welcome to Liverpool, where we are at the Labour Party conference. This is Sophy on Sunday, The Take, where we digest what we've just heard in the last hour. But also, to be honest, look, it's a special programme for us. We're in Liverpool. We want to be finding out all about what Labour is going to be doing over the next few days. And I'm delighted to say we are joined live here by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. But we've also got two Labour MPs to talk to as well. The MP for Walthamstow, Stella Creasy, and for Streatham, Ribeiro-Addy. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Right, Sam, let's start off with you first. What has Labour got to do at this conference?
Well, I think for good reason there are people around Keir Starmer saying that really this is the most important moment since he became Labour leader a couple of years ago. Because I think if we're being honest, Sophie, what we haven't seen over the last 12 months, for completely understandable reasons, is Keir Starmer actually intruding massively into our national story. And that's because we've had a huge Tory psychodrama. You know, we've talked for months upon months about Boris Johnson and parties. Ukraine came along, and then you had the leadership contest at the election of Liz Truss, and that big change in direction last Friday. Now, all of that, and I think they would acknowledge this around Keir Starmer, squeeze the amount of space that he's had to kind of really project himself on the British public. So the main job this week, I think, is to catch everybody's attention, to actually put out that alternative, to deal with that slight criticism that there's been a little bit under the surface, that he spends all his time niggling and criticising and opposing, but doesn't set out a great, big, bold vision. And
have you got any idea whether that's going to happen or not? I mean, we've got a bit of policy this morning. Ed Miliband was talking about it with the commitment to net zero for electricity by 2030, 5 years faster than the government was saying. We've heard this morning that Labour would reinstate the 45p rate of tax, but would not reverse the 20p to 19p income tax. I mean, so are we getting a sign that they're being bold?
So with what we saw on Friday from Liz Truss and the new Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, they effectively turned political orthodoxy, Tory orthodoxy, on its head with that set of very large, controversial announcements in order to prop up, they think, growth. So one of the things that Keir Starmer has started to have to do this morning is answer the questions that they leave. And as you say, this morning that we now know that Labour would reverse in office that decision to get rid of the highest rate of tax for people over £150,000. Keir Starmer's made that absolutely clear. If he gets into government, as Labour government, they would reinstate a higher level of tax for people earning over £150,000. Interestingly, it looks like they would keep the decision to cut the basic rate of tax from 20p to 19p. But so I think there's a sort of bigger challenge here is that Keir Starmer can't just run around this conference being chased by Liz Truss's essay questions. The question is whether or not his vision is big enough and bold enough, eye-catching enough and exciting enough. Now, I think we've had a bit of a hint about what that vision is going to centre around. It's the one that Ed Miliband was talking to you about. It's about green jobs and that net zero carbon target for power for 2030. Now, the question, I think, is does that engage and does it capture the imagination of people? That's a target. It's got some detail attached about doubling of solar and onshore wind. But is that a match in the imagination of the country, something that can match the scale of the stuff that we saw on Friday? Because I think Keir Starmer's got to make sure that he doesn't end up just answering those questions and ending up having a bit of a fight with the left. We did that at last year's Labour conference. He had a bit of a battle with the left. He won that battle, but he hasn't got the political time and space to do that again. You heard Andy Burnham niggling around at the side. I don't think it massively matters. Andy Burnham isn't an MP. He's not really going for the leadership yet. But he's got to make sure that the headline's not about that, but about what he wants to talk about, and that cuts through and is exciting enough. What's the four-word slogan at the end of this week that defines Labour's economic policy? I don't know yet. I don't know yet whether they're even going to have one.
Well, let's put some of those questions, shall we, to our MP guests as well. Really interesting, as always, to hear your thoughts, Sam. I think it's a good point, isn't it? Ed Miliband can't just fall into the trap of answering the essay questions that Liz Truss has set. What do you want to see from Ed Miliband at this conference, Belle? Ed Miliband, oh my goodness, Keir Starmer, sorry, it's on my brain. I need another coffee this morning, obviously.
It's only day one.
I know, we've got a long way to go, right? Keir Starmer.
I think we need to see a clear vision. I'm really worried that people keep saying they don't know what we stand for. And, you know, I don't think we're going to have an election anytime soon. people are preparing for one. But even if people aren't preparing for one, even if it's not going to happen anytime soon, we need to be clear. We need to be clear for a long period of time, because if one was to just be called, we'd only have a short period of time to convince people. So everyone needs to know now what we stand for, what we're going to do, how we're going to be different. It's not good enough to just say, we're not the Tories, vote for us.
Do you know what Labour stands for?
I know what Labour was founded on, and I know what I believe we should stand for, but I'm not completely clear at this moment what our plans are moving forward. I'm sure they're in play. I don't think anybody is ridiculous enough not to be in play, but I just think it needs to be laid out fearlessly. And, you know, some people won't like it, but it's not for the people that won't like it. We need to convince those that usually vote Labour. We need to convince those people that we know that we can bring along. So we shouldn't show fear just because we may have the right-wing press coming up against us or other people making certain comments who are traditionally Tory voters. We need to go out and secure our base.
Do you agree with that?
I have been really surprised by the people in my community who are not particularly political, who are genuinely angry about Friday, genuinely angry that in a cost of living crisis, it's bankers' incomes that this government is really concerned about, and are saying this has to stop. So I think what I agree with Belle about is that now is not the time to play it safe and showing people that there is another way. Because the thing I really worry about in politics is people somehow think, well, you're all the same. What Friday showed is that we are clearly not. What Sunday onwards need to show is what that difference is. And I'm standing here as the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. So I'm here also at this conference to say, how are we going to do this in cooperation? Because Liz Truss is shredding our relationships around the world, running up massive bills. It's like she's putting the gas bill on the mortgage bill and saying, these are the people I care about. The rest of you, you're on your own. I know, working in cooperation, not just in our communities, but as a country, we can achieve better. So you ask about what we want to see. Actually, I'm pleased you asked about Ed Miliband. I think it's really fantastic to talk about renewable energy, because that makes a lot of sense to people. Actually, renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuel right now, but being a country that produces it is a really good way to run the economy. But what I know is that we could do that more efficiently if we work with our European counterparts across the North Seas to do that. So what I want to see at conference is not just a recognition of the issues, but some of the processes that will show the public we've got a plan for action.
It's quite interesting listening to Belle there just saying that she's not completely sure what Labour stands for at the minute, that you believe that obviously those discussions are going on, but right now she's unsure. I mean, if Labour MPs are saying that, then I guess that is a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and I think the reason it's hard is because it is hard, because your options are limited. What Liz Truss did on Friday was spend a huge amount of money. To coin somebody a long time ago, there's no money left, and there won't be if and when you end up with a Labour government. But you are also very clear as a party that you are going to maintain fiscal discipline, that you are going to stick to those fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves has outlined. So the question for me really is, and it's not one that can be answered this morning, but if you're going to stick to the rules, you're not going to have much money left. How are you going to be able to promise, for instance, big increases in public services funding, education funding, topping up the NHS, money for social care? If Labour can't do that over the next year or 2 years, what kind of election offer do you have? Because that's a really tricky area. If you keep fiscal discipline, there's no money left. What are you going to say on public services?
In terms of what we stand for.
Let's take that question head on. This is why it matters to have a properly redistributed tax system. It's why it matters cutting the 45p tax, because doing that, the money that raises would pay for universal childcare from 6 months. And why does that matter? Because that's an infrastructure investment in our economy. Because right now there are lots of families, and women in particular, who cannot work, cannot pay taxes because they can't get decent childcare, and it doesn't stack up for them. So yes, absolutely, you can have fiscal discipline, but it's the understanding of why you invest in people. Investing in bankers doesn't generate growth in the same way that investing in people does. And things like childcare help make you do that.
So we've heard this morning from Keir Starmer that he would reinstate the 45p additional rate, but he would not reverse the cut, the 1p cut to the lower rate of income tax. Do you think that's right?
Well, I think what we need to be doing overall is showing people the maths, essentially, showing people that how it's going to work out. In terms of what we're standing for, I think you've laid out what we as a Labour Party would generally say when it comes to these things. The issue is how we're convincing people, and things like that may not necessarily convince people. So you just need to be a bit clearer on how it's going to work, because somebody will always have an argument against. And I just worry that sometimes when we're explaining these things, people aren't understanding them in the way that we're putting it out, and it makes it seem as if we're spending a whole lot of money and that things are just going to go to completeness, but it's not true.
Do you think Labour needs to be more careful than the Conservatives as well, because of the responsibility?
Come on, let's be clear. This is a government that is actively putting money into pockets of millionaires and borrowing to be able to do that. And in the way that they're borrowing, the pound is, technical term, tanking, which means it's going to be even more expensive for us. I'm not going to take any lectures from Kwasi Kwarteng about fiscal discipline, but I take Sam's challenge that it's about how you use the money to get a better return for your buck. So absolutely, Belle's right. We've got to show people why the maths stack up, because we're facing an incredibly reckless Chancellor. What he's doing would make Margaret Thatcher blush.
Okay.
We know the money's there, essentially, because they can give it away to millionaires. We just need to show people how we're going to redistribute it. And I think we need to be quite clever about that, because they've proven that the money is there. And whenever we want to spend it on public spending, they keep going on about how, you're just running up our debts, but they're borrowing in a way that is actually unsustainable. And they're not using it for people.
We need to take a break. We'll have more from the two of you, more from Sam in a few moments' time. See you then.
How would you like to again?
Part of it is, well, why do it in the first place? And I think it's because you get to examine the theme and the environment in which you are making the movie at that time. Pinocchio, state-of-the-art anime, probably the apex of Disney's animation, utilizing the new multiplane camera in which all these photographic animation effects are possible for the first time in a feature film. Well, Bob is going to approach every shot like that as well. But then you also have the thematic elements of telling the truth, listening to your conscience, making the right choice. And this movie, the original came out in 1941. We know what that year was like. This movie is coming out in 2022. We know what's going on here. And some of those questions of the human conditions still are worth being asked.
Turn around, let me get a look at you. I will be right here when you get back.
Pinocchio is running around loose without a conscience? Can you imagine the trouble he's gonna get into?
Wouldn't want that on my conscience.
Everybody who's anybody wants to be a somebody.
But I want to be real.
Why on earth would you want to be real when you can be famous?
The guys here at Disney have asked me quite a few times, and I was reluctant to touch something that's such an important animated film. But, all I can say is that a couple things happened. We finally developed the kind of technology that we needed to really do it seamlessly and beautifully, re-envision it in 3 dimensions and photoreal way. And then one morning I sort of woke up with an idea for how to, kind of put the right kind of feel on, the story. And once that happens, you kind of have to do it.
Pinocchio.
Non-selfish.
You will always be my real boy.
Hello and welcome to Liverpool. You're watching Sophy Ridge The Take. We are at the Labour Party conference and we're digesting some of the interviews that we've heard the morning. We're throwing forward to what Keir Starmer needs to do to show that he is a government in waiting with the Labour Party. And we're joined to discuss all that by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, and also 2 Labour MPs, the Labour MP for Walthamstow, Stella Creasy, and for Streatham, Ribeiro-Addy. Thank you. Great to have you here this morning. So, I mean, in the intro, it kind of touched on that. You know, Keir Starmer needs to prove that Labour is ready to govern. Do you think that you are on course to win the next election?
Oh, I absolutely think that we've got a strong case to make, and frankly, if we don't, there will be more years of Conservative rule than the last Conservative government. That'll be 19 years of Conservative government. And for all of us who've seen the damage that they're doing in our communities, that is a horrifying prospect. I think we all take the challenge that you have to be more than an opposition, you have to be an alternative. So what we're all looking to do this week is set out how to make that happen. And as I say, I'm here as the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. We will be talking a lot about how we could tackle some of the problems that have come as a result of leaving the European Union to show British business that we've got the ideas and we understand how to make it work for them.
Do you think Labour's done enough to prove to the public that you're ready for power?
I think people are going to want more because people always want more, and we're going to need to give it to them. And just remember that it's going to take a while to convince people, especially when we're faced with a barrage of press who are on the other side in terms of who they support and the type of views they put forward about Labour. And the fact, actually, they like to go on a lot about some of our internal struggles. We are a broad church. We have always disagreed. We see the Tories disagree all the time. It just doesn't seem to make
Well, hang
the front
on.
pages.
We talk an awful lot about the Conservatives disagreeing as well.
Not in the same way. I don't think so. I don't think it's played out in the same way. And I think it always has worse consequences for us when really we're just a political party of people that goes across a wide spectrum that disagree on stuff sometimes. But we're all Labour, and I think that's the most important thing.
OK, let's talk to Sam. Sam, what do you think Labour need to do to show that they're a government in waiting?
Well, I think that they need to plant ideas in people's minds that voters take away from this conference, specifics that are going to make life different. I've got a couple of sort of questions, a couple of challenges. Stella, as you have pointed out, you are chair of the Labour for Europe. One of the big things you could be saying to get growth going is that you're going to ease barriers with the European Union for growth. There are plenty of people in your party who think that. But Labour just looks to me like it cannot talk about Europe. It doesn't want to talk about Europe. You're a rare exception. Why is Labour silent on
Then
Europe?
I hope you're coming to our big rally at 12:30 today at the Crown Plaza in Liverpool, where we'll be talking exactly that. Let me give you a really good example
Which
of
is
that.
not the main hall. You are
That was where we could book, Sam.
Because they
rules
don't want
of
the
origin.
debate on
Lots
the
of
centre
businesses
of it.
in this country are struggling with the rules of origin, basically the red tape about being able to put things into the supply chain. There are things that we could do now. We could join something called the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention overnight. It's an organisation that has more than European countries in. It would help tackle those rules of origin things. Because Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have such a dogma that everything European is wrong, a third of British businesses have stopped exporting to Europe. You can't be pro-growth if you're not pro-Europe. So what we're going to be talking about today is how Labour can lead that. We've already led the way on having a food standards deal, but actually we can go much further to help British manufacturing now and show what we could do now to get jobs in this country.
So would you like Keir Starmer to talk more about Europe then?
Absolutely. And my job as the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe is to create that debate and put forward those ideas and say, well, take up the challenge, because Europe does not want to negotiate long, lengthy treaties with us anytime soon. But they will listen to us if we show that we are serious about wanting to work with them. And tackling rules of origin is a great way of doing that.
But Sam, you asked why, and it's clear, it's fear. It's fear because of the Brexit referendum, because of the toxicity that came out of it afterwards, because of what it cost us in the last general election. It's fear. And just as with all of these other policies, we have to get over this fear and show people who we are and what it is we're going to do for the country.
But can you win if you think voters are afraid of things that you say? Let's take another issue. One big issue at this conference, not sure they're talking about it out in the streets, that's electoral reform. Should there be a change in our voting system? Should there perhaps be teaming up with, in parts of the country, the Liberal Democrats, the SNP, in order to get rid of the Tories? Do you think that's a priority? What do you think the party should do about
Well, if it's what the people of the conference want to talk about, it absolutely is a priority. We are the Labour Party. We are a membership-led party. That means what the members want to discuss and what people in the country...
Do you want change? Do you want the party to change its stance?
Well, there has to be change. There 100% has to be change. Whether or not it's what people are talking about at the moment is another story, but we're not going to know this until we have a debate about it. And if we don't have a debate, there's going to be a lot of people who are annoyed about not having a debate, but also no other alternatives put forward.
Why do you want change but Keir Starmer doesn't?
I don't know if he doesn't want change. All I know at the moment is that we're just not talking about it, which I think is wrong.
I think when we see what Boris Johnson's going to put into the House of Lords, questions about electoral reform and constitutional reform will come up again. I'm somebody who's always campaigned for some kind of electoral reform. I disagree on electoral pacts. I think that's a different thing. I think we all recognise our electoral system. 40% of people in this country don't think democracy works. So there is a crisis of political representation. I take your point about if people at the moment are choosing between heating or eating, can't do either, then our constitutional questions are the ones they want to see us talking about. It's something that's part of being different. I think the priorities for this week absolutely are how do you help people who are right now thinking there's too much month at the end of their money.
Right, we're nearly out of time, so just a bit of a challenge at the end. If there was one thing that you want Labour to be talking all about over the next couple of days, what is it? What's your one thing?
Cost of living crisis, top thing.
Stella?
How we actually get growth into the economy by working with our European counterparts.
And Sam, what do you think they should be talking about?
Keir Starmer has got to implant his vision firmly in people's minds now, this week. He's got to work on his language. He's got to work on how he connects with people. He's got to come up with things that are memorable. He's got to come up with phrases, bits of speeches that people take away with them. That's a bigger test than it sounds because he hasn't done it in the 2.5 years so far. He needs to go up a gear.
Really interesting to talk. Always enjoyed the take, a bit more relaxed. It's really nice to have the opportunity to have a bit more of a conversation. Sam, thank you. And thank you very much, Stella and Belle. Great to have you on the programme. That is it for Sophy Ridge on Sunday. The Take, the podcast, is going to be up just after lunchtime. So do make sure you check that one out. Good to see you. See you next Sunday.
Dubai is always changing its landscape. We're always looking at new ways to make sure that people who visit Dubai again and again have new things to see. Museum of the Future, for example, it's a stunning piece of architecture, but also has incorporated the Arabic calligraphy. We've just introduced the Deep Dive Dubai, a 60-meter deep pool within a city where people as families, friends and groups can go and experience a post-apocalyptic building. Today, Dubai is proud to have close to 12,000 restaurants and the first Michelin guide for the region. Dubai is a city where everyone can find something that's relevant to them, whether it's a leisure experience, a business experience, or a rest and relaxation.
Check this out.
It hasn't been such a long time since people first started shopping online, and it was easy to keep up with the clicks. Little by little by little by more, the clicks added up to be more than the stores, and e-tailers worked harder than ever before, because they had to keep up with the clicks. All of a sudden, there are so many must-dos if you want to keep selling, like delivery there, no there, or there.
And make it tomorrow. First thing.
No time for borders. Got to stay in control, to stay in the flow and continue to grow. But we'll help you. Keep up with the clicks.